So on behalf of Berlinale Talents, a warm welcome to this wonderful Monday afternoon here. I would like to ask Liz Rosenthal to come on stage. She will be your host for this afternoon and your moderator. And yeah, it's all about cross-media this afternoon here in Hall 3. Liz is a close friend of Berlinale Talents and a long-time companion since 2007. And she runs this wonderful program based in London, Power to the Pixel, every year with the Pixel Pictures and the Cross Media Forum. And yeah, also we have many experts here sitting in the audience already, also for the next session, Cross Media 2, which will then start at 5. The session is, we created a new event format, so you have tickets now for this 2 o'clock Cross Media 1 session, followed by a network breakout. So this nice wording comes from our host from Indiegogo. Miranda Fleming is with us. And also the experts from the 2 panels will be here for your questions. Yeah, and we will then open also this venue here for for the breakout at 3:30. Thank you, Liz, for coming.
Thank you. So thank you, Christina, for the introduction, and it's lovely to be here again. I think this is my ninth year. It's amazing. It's always a pleasure to come back to the Berlinale. It's really nice how this session has developed over the years, because it started very much around how you engage and distribute your projects with audiences. And now it's very much about how we've gone right back to the beginning of how you grow ideas, and you have to think about engaging audiences right from the start of your projects. So that's really what we're going to be talking about over the 2 sessions this afternoon at the networking break, is how do you use interactivity, how do you use cross-media approaches to build your project, your audience, and your media brand or identity. That's what we're going to be talking about over these sessions. So this first session, I'm going to be co-presenting with Sean Coleman, who's in the front row. So Sean Coleman is projects director. He can get some of that later. Or now. So Sean Coleman is projects director at Power to the Pixel, but also is a very experienced writer and producer and has worked on many interactive and innovative story formats. For over probably about 15 years he's been working in this space. So we're really happy he's been working with us at Power to the Pixel. He started as one of our mentors on our lab, which I'm going to tell you more about in a bit. And now he's projects director. So he's really happy to talk to you about if you're interested in bringing one of your projects on our programs. But Sean also worked on a project that he's going to talk about later, amongst other projects, called Netwars, which was at our market a couple of years ago in competition. A very interesting project when you think about brand building across different platforms. Then we're going to have a networking break for 90 minutes, and we're going to come back and talk, hear from Timo Vuensola, who created the Iron Sky Universe brand. He's going to talk about that. And then Raphael Huisman, who is from Quebec, who has made a fantastic project called Fort McMoney, which is an interactive web doc, and she's going to talk about how she uses interactive tools to tell a story in a new way and engage audiences. So that's the whole day. And I just wanted to check out of you, who is going to be here for the second session in the afternoon? So quite a few of you, that's great, probably about half. Great, fantastic. So, I come from an independent film background. I don't come from the digital world. And the reason I set up Power to the Pixel was because I felt a real need in the film and media industry. I worked with a company that was part of the independent film channel for 4 or 5 years, I ran the UK office of Next Wave Films, where we were helping emerging first and second time feature makers launch their projects. So we started as a finishing fund, and we helped when the whole low budget movement started, and when people started using digital tools to tell stories. We were one of the first companies that started financing film shot on digital video. So we made 13 different feature films. It was 9 or 10 that we actually got involved in the middle and finished the films and sold them. Also, we were a producer's rep for the American market. And then we did 3 films that we produced from the beginning, from script stage. All of our films went to major festivals. They all won major awards. They all had North American distribution, but none of them ever reached their audience. They came out on screens, for example, in North America, on the West Coast and the East Coast, on a Friday night, and they were off the next Friday. And despite the fact that they had great critical acclaim, they had big core audiences, we felt, for the projects, it just seemed very frustrating that you would spend ages making a project in a vacuum over several years as you were developing it, without any contact whatsoever with your audience. And then when you got to the sort of point of sale, there was no audience, and the mechanism of distributing the project was not didn't seem right. And so I was very interested in how the internet, how interactivity, how new media tools were going to change the way that you could find audiences and engage audiences, and then develop ideas from the beginning. So Power to the Pixel, that was kind of the mission, was to help film and media companies adapt to stay relevant to digital change and changing audiences. And I wanted to tell you a bit about what we do, because it kind of fits in with how I feel we have to start thinking about developing ideas today. I think we have to radically turn around how we develop projects. And this is what we kind of discovered through our programs, really. So the first, we do 2 things. We run development labs, where we work with a variety of different partners from around the world, and we run events where we broker relationships between talent and producers and potential financiers and commissioners from right across the different media industries. So our lab is our Pixel Lab is our main annual development program, and we've just opened for applications. What we work in a very special way and methodology where we take 20 producers with projects every year and 20 participants without projects. We work very collaboratively in groups. We have an amazing group of experts who come from around the world, who are all practitioners and are all working on their own projects year in, year out. So they have a lot to share with us. And they come from all sort of parts of the media value chain, and also some of them come out of the publishing industry, some come out of the games industry, some from the film, some from TV, some from advertising, but we all meet in the middle. We're all interested in how you tell stories. And that's really what we're interested in, how you tell stories, how you reach your audience, and how you communicate with your audience. A lot of these terms like cross-media, transmedia are kind of complicated. We get people coming to us saying, I have a cross-media project, or I have a transmedia project. And it's quite hard or varied to know what that means in a way. And you'll see from the projects being shown this afternoon that that spans so much. We're moving from a high concept sci-fi fiction piece to an interactive social impact web doc, to children's projects, to a documentary project that crosses fact and fiction. So what does it mean? Well, I'm not going to go into that because I don't think it's useful sometimes to define what cross-media or transmedia is. We're telling stories and we're trying to communicate them with people and hopefully to create sustainable businesses or endeavours. So at the Pixel Lab, that's what we're trying to do. We take people with film and from the film, television, games, and we're interested in good stories, really, and finding new ways to tell them. The other thing we do is we run the forum every year in October, which is a market, the Pixel Market, where we select over around 35 projects from around the world. We have a conference, we have like a co-production market where instead of just one siloed industry, just film, or a television market or a games market, we bring them all together to meet the projects. And we run a think tank where we also bring together the funding bodies and financiers, because we think this is really important to get them into the conversation so that the structures that are going to support you in the future also adapt to stay relevant. And this is a big problem, is financing projects and getting people to invest in new ways to do things. So we're working on all these things together as an organisation. So we think it's really important that you bring all these people from these different industries together, and unless you do that, we're going to get siloed and stuck in our own sectors, because audiences are morphing across all these different sectors. They don't care about format anymore, but us as industry are still stuck. We still go to, a lot of our events and the way we operate are in silos, and we feel let's bring all these people together from these different companies, from different industries is really important. So we know that technology has changed the way that we are experiencing and engaging with stories and communicating with each other. So no story exists in one media platform anymore. Audiences, users, consumers are moving effortlessly from one place and space and platform and device to the next. And they want to engage with their content in all these different places. Stories have become living entities. They're shared, discussed, and remixed in all these different places. And we've got more stories, more storytellers, and more ways to tell stories than ever before. And that means that there is an abundance. We've moved from a model where everything was very restricted to one of abundance. And now the value of the content has dropped, but the value of people's attention has risen. So what's really, really essential is trying to understand who you are talking to, who you're trying to communicate with, and take a much more sort of user or people-centric approach to developing ideas. So it means that you have to think in a kind of, you have to be a kind of digital anthropologist or a psychologist when it comes to thinking about what you're doing, and really think about how technology has changed the social norms around what people do, what motivates them to want to engage with an idea, where are they going to engage with it. And that's something we're trying to do on our lab, is think really about people, about core ideas, about people, and first, and then think very much about what platform or which method you use to engage them. So that's what we're trying to do in our lab, but a lot of the time when you're developing projects in the traditional space, it's not like that at all. It's really the same way it's always been, where you start with one predetermined format, which in film and television, you're just concentrating on that feature film format or that TV format. And over a long space of time, you're developing it in a vacuum, where you have a long process of script development. You're trying to look for finance. Once you hopefully finish your project, you take it to a festival or to a market. And it's only when hopefully somebody picks it up to sell that they ever start thinking about an audience. And it's handed over to someone else who licenses your project to start finding an audience. And often, we know in film development, that's around 5 years, if you're lucky, from concept to the point a distributor may have picked it up for a territory and be trying to put it into a cinema. That's an awful long time when you think about how things change, just in terms of technological development and devices and the zeitgeist of culture and ideas. 5 years is sometimes a short time for film development, but in terms of our audience culture and how ideas flow and change, it's massive, and it's ridiculous that we're not doing things earlier to try and think about whether ideas have traction. So there are various companies who are trying to take a more sort of platform or a more cross-media approach to what they're developing. So they're thinking about how do you engage different audiences on different platforms with their ideas, but at the same time I feel that a lot of this has been done in the same kind of way, where people are starting with one idea that's a film or a television project that's the kind of dominant media, and afterwards the secondary idea is a marketing idea to develop new types of interactive products or extensions. But this is just, you know, at Pixel, we feel that this is really about sort of extra product development. It's not necessarily about audience engagement. So a lot of the time, these projects are developed at the same time as the film or television project. Often they're only given a green light once the main part of the project has been financed. So they're made really rapidly, often underfunded, often made by a completely different production company, and the process isn't, the idea is not integrated into the story development. And a lot of the time, they fail, and there's been a lot of pressure to try and justify why we should be creating, we should be taking cross-media approaches or using interactive tools. And that's because I think there's always a pressure when you're innovating to succeed fast. And we know in terms of the traditional sort of industry, it's failing because it's really not finding new ways to sort of engage with audiences. And I think we have to really, when we're taking cross-media approaches, we have to be really careful that we try and do it in a really logical way, that we don't just think, okay, there are all these different spaces you can tell a project, why don't we just create a web product, why don't we create an app? You have to think strategically about how you're going to do that in a kind of, grow a sort of organic way that doesn't involve you as a producer having to do all these things at once, which is really complicated. So at the lab, we try to get people to think in a different way, where we go right back to the core idea, what drives your story. And then we start thinking about who you're trying to talk with, who you're communicating with, who you want to engage, and where you're going to start engaging them. So these are three important things we bring up right at the beginning of the process. What's the core of your story? What drives the story all the way through? Which you're going to have to think of every time you start making, using another platform, using another tool to tell your story. Why are you using it? And does it fit into the kind of core ideas and themes that you're trying to develop and communicate? What's your goal? If your goal is to make a feature film at the end, that's absolutely fine. We're not saying that you should be doing a whole array of different products. It's just, how do you get there? How could you develop that project in a more rational way, where you can start developing things earlier, or ideas that are kind of could test out what the core themes of your project are, or could help you develop financing for the project as you go along. And obviously the strategy is what ties it all together. So at the end of the lab, that's what we hope you have, is a plan of where to go next. So we're kind of thinking about project development in a kind of different way, where you're not in this 5-year kind of vacuum, but it's an idea that maybe you're going to start making something a lot faster and you're going to test it out and see whether it has traction. So you start by identifying the core themes and ideas. You build a plan. You think, what is your first sort of minimum viable element? So that's the MVP. It's a term that's used in the tech world a lot. What's the first product that you're going to throw out and test with your audience early on? See if it has traction, and then if it doesn't, at least you're failing fast. You're not wasting all that time. You're not raising a huge budget for a project that doesn't have an audience or consumer base, but you're testing it out and growing that project fast, and hopefully doing it within a year. So I'm using this term organic brand development. Those tulips don't look that organic though, but I couldn't find a better image. It's this idea that instead of this checkbox, tick box of all these different interactive and cross-media products, that we often had when we first had applications to our lab, we'd often ask people, and it was our fault in a way, what platforms are you going to use to tell your story? And people would sort of write down every single possible element and buzzword and new idea, ARGs, apps, web apps, different types of game products. We're thinking, where do you start and how do you grow that idea gradually? And that's why I wanted to use these 5 projects as examples of how I think this has been successfully done. So you're going to hear about Netwars and Forkment Money and Iron Sky later, but I also wanted to add 2 other projects that I think are interesting to look at. Now you'll see when I was saying, what do we mean when I say we have a cross-media story or a transmedia story? It doesn't mean anything because, you could kind of apply those terms to these projects, and they're all completely different. They're all different genres. They all have completely different audiences. They're all told on different media platforms, but they have some things that tie them together, which put them in a common category. The fact that all of them have started, they didn't have one predetermined format, so they all started with core themes or ideas. They're all using interactivity to engage an audience or start the story or the brand. And they all started most of them started to try and engage audiences very early on, instead of making one product and waiting until the goal was the one product and waiting all that time before they engaged audiences. And that's why I think they're really interesting, all of them as ideas. So because, I'm just going to quickly, who was here last year actually at the session I did with Katerina Sizek? Was there anyone here? A few of you. So I know many of you have heard of this project before, the High Rise project, but I think it's just wanted to remind you of why I think it's a really interesting project in the kind of documentary space. So High Rise is a project that's about high-rise living around cities around the world. So most of the world's population lives in concrete blocks in different continents around the world, and it's becoming, the world's population is moving into these areas. So Kat wanted to explore what that meant. And she didn't start by thinking she would make a documentary feature. She was a documentary storyteller who had worked on film and worked a bit in the web space. She started with this core idea, and the project grew over 5 years into all these different elements. So these are all the sort of round or oval different parts of the diagram are all the different things, products, elements that she developed within the high-rise universe. And so it was a totally new approach to form and content. Every single element was digital, interactive, or non-linear. And the approach to content was iterative, so it started with research and development. It started by testing out ideas and really designing the right sort of interface, not knowing what the interface was, but designing it as she was developing the story. It was collaborative in the sense it used many people from different sectors, and it was also, all of the projects were community-based, so she brought people together from different, who were actually people who were the inhabitants of different spaces and places that she was talking about, so they all played a part in the storytelling. So the first part was an interactive web doc that won many different awards around the world, and it told the story of 13 different people in 13 different blocks, in 13 different cities, countries around the world. And it's still absolutely beautiful in terms of an interface. She spent a lot of time developing the structure or the interface of how the story was going to be told. And then she had a style guide that she sent out to the different people she worked with academic researchers to find the journalists and storytellers she worked with, and they all developed their own story within the style guide. She never actually went to these places to shoot. So all of these bits of the project, you can find them on the National Film Board of Canada website. It was an NFB project, and it was the first project that started in the English-speaking studio of the National Film Board of Canada. So Raphael's project was developed in collaboration with the French-speaking part in Quebec, but the National Film Board of Canada, one of the organisations who produce and co-produce every year award-winning projects. They're beautifully designed, and they're a wonderful example of thinking carefully how design and works in this space from a kind of like interactive perspective, design and storytelling. The next part of the project was an installation that she first took to IDFA, which kind of emulated what it felt to move through, because what happens when, I didn't have enough time to go through the project, but in each of these 13 flats you can move around the flat. It's a kind of 360 experience. And she tried to do this in a physical space, so she took that around the world and did different kind of events and music events with the installation. She then did a community-based project based in Toronto, where she got the residents of a very rundown tower block to talk about how they would like to redevelop their environment, which turned into a collaboration with Mozilla, which was she developed into a kind of 3D spatial space where actually it was a collaboration between the residents from the 1000th Tower, animators, urban town planners, and the National Film Board of Canada to reimagine the space where they lived. And what's wonderful about this project is it actually was the first stages of an urban redevelopment project, which is a really beautiful project to go inside, and it used many different tools, new tools to envisage a space in a browser. But it actually was a real project that turned into something that changed their environment in the end. The final part of the project was a collaboration with the New York Times. That's a short history, The High Rise, which is 4 different interactive films, very beautifully designed. So all of these different collaborations with different partners. And the last collaboration is very interesting because it's a newspaper brand, one of the most eminent and very wealthy newspaper brands in the world. Now, if you look at the collaboration between the public institution and a very corporate institution, it's a perfect kind of marriage because the NFB needs to find ways to widen the audience for these projects. And the New York Times is looking for new types of ways to tell story that sits beyond the printed newspaper or even words. And a lot of the newspaper brands now are moving in this direction. So The Guardian, there are German and French newspapers who are now collaborating with interactive projects, and they make great partners. And this was an example where the circulation of this project and the amount of people who saw it within a week was, I think, 15, 20 times more than the High Rise project, which had won awards all around the world 3 years previously. People had seen over 3 years in, a few days. It had spread very, very far, and they also sold sort of quite high-end advertising association with it. So it was a very interesting connection, and I think the newspaper brands, we invite them to Power to Pixel to our market, and there have been many interesting collaborations that come out of it. But Raphael's going to mention that when she talks about Fortnite Money later. So another project I wanted to show you was Gigglebug. And you can look, you can look online at these projects, and we also have case studies on our website. So I'm not going to play the trailers, you can just look them up afterwards. So Gigglebug was a project that came through a lab we did with the Nordisk Film and Television Fund, so a pan-Nordic fund where we worked with, it was 14 different project ideas over, we had 7 one year, 7 another year. And why I love this project, because the core theme that holds it together is laughter, and the idea that laughter isn't contagious and it's good for you. It's a project for young children. It first started as an app. It comes from Finland, and it started as a really lovely project where you have to tickle the creatures. It makes them laugh, and it helps them in the kind of like story in the app, because it's a kind of mixture between they play a lot between storytelling and game design. It helps the characters achieve the tasks they have to achieve by laughing. Laughing is good for you, and it helps you solve many problems. So that was the first part of the project. There was also a pilot television series that worked really well, and now they're actually in production with a 52 episode series. So the app was the first thing that they threw out, and it was a couple of years ago. Oh, just a minute. So it was actually a year and almost a year and 3/4 ago. It came out, and it's managed to stay in a lot of the App Store sort of top 5 or top 10 over that time. It's such a beautiful idea, and it is kind of contagious as an app. So worth looking up. It's actually a free app, but they're developing many other different apps. Some of them are more story-led, and some of them are have other sort of purposes. There's a music app that's just coming out that plays with the idea of laughter, and it's got this lovely tickle touch interaction. I'm going to show you a trailer of, because it's quite nice, because they always test for children. The idea is tested and user tested. Ooh, we've got a bit of sound. Can we hear some sound? There's no sound actually on there. Oh, that's a shame. It doesn't seem to be unmuting, unfortunately. Never mind. You can... I'm trying to think. You can actually download this for free and try it out. It's the first app, so Gigglebug. Don't worry, it's... Oh, we didn't let me put it down because it's going to be really loud now. Okay. Sorry about that. And so I'm not going to say much about these projects, but I'm just going to say why I think they're why we're going to be showcasing them this afternoon, because I'm going to move over to Sean in a moment. So Netwars is a project Sean's going to talk about that was produced by a company called Film Tank, who's based out of Berlin. Is Michael or Saskia here, actually? No, they're not here. So this is a fact-based cross-media experience that explores the threat of cyber warfare that's told over 7 different formats. And it's an interesting mix of fact and fiction, and an interesting way how they tied together the whole brand. And the character that sits in the middle, that Sean will talk more about, sits... No? You're shaking your head? Sits kind of at the centre of the story world, or is meant to sit at the centre of the story world. So Sean will talk more about that. And Raphael is going to talk about how interactivity can help tell a social impact story in a more effective way, how you can get people engaged in the idea through game mechanics. And also it's interesting because it's the first part of, there are 2 projects they're developing. And next is going to be Timo, who, how many people have seen Iron Sky, the film? Oh, it's great, so quite a few. So for those of you who don't know, the first Iron Sky film was premiered at the Berlinale. Was it 2 years ago? 3? 2012. 3 years ago. And Timo started developing the project in 2005. Yeah, and it's now 2015, so 10 years ago, has built a community and kept that community engaged over all this time through various methods of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, and by developing really interesting interactive tools and products that keep an audience, that engage an audience. And it's a super example of brand building. He's now onto his 2nd film that he's in pre-development with, and he's also developing different products, which he developed some of these products in the first film, but again, it's a whole, I would call it an independent franchise that he's developing around a core idea. So a wonderful example of that. So I'm going to move on to Sean now, who's going to be talking about his projects. So thank you very much.
Let me just pull up a slidey thing here. Okay. Cool. So yes, as Liz said, I'm Sean Coleman. I do work with Power to the Pixel as their projects director, which is a role I took on last year. But I'm also a writer and producer, more of a writer these days than a producer, simply because, well, it's a long story. I started out as a writer. So, as Liz mentioned, in 1993 I began my first paid writing job, which was for a company called The Digital Village, which was run by the late Douglas Adams, and we were jointly creating The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy online. And I'd done a university degree, a bachelor's degree in scriptwriting for film and television. And one of my university lecturers had offered me a role as one of the writers, the original writers on this project. And it sounded, I loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I knew the brand, it sounded very exciting. You have to bear in mind in 1993 that the internet, I'd been introduced to the internet as an entity 2 years earlier, in my second year at university, where they took me into the library and showed me the internet machine. which would allow us to communicate with other libraries more effectively than the old write it on a piece of paper, send it off and ask for the details. So the internet machine was this sort of enormous old computer that sat in the library that you had to book time on, and you could order thesis and manuscripts from other libraries around the UK. It hadn't occurred to me that there was an audience of people using the internet for entertainment and other things until I went in and spoke to the people at the Digital Village, and they offered me a job as a writer, writing in the style of Douglas Adams to make that black box of the Hitchhiker's Guide actually come to life. And on the day I started, about a week after I started working for them, they registered the domain name h2g2.com. And immediately, there was nothing on it, just a holding page said h2g2.com. It's no branding, no logos. And it would get attacked every day. There's a fan base out there who knew about Douglas Adams. They were on blogs, very old, weird-looking blogs. And they were desperate to know what was going on. So immediately you kind of think, hang on, as a writer, because you have to bear in mind I'd left university thinking Hollywood would be calling, and this was going to be my temporary job until Hollywood called. And I mean, anytime now it's going to happen, Hollywood will call. So it hadn't occurred to me that writing for anything other than film and TV would be a thing. And yet there we were we were writing pure fiction that had to abide by all of the laws of fiction. Apart from it was also the improbable world of Hitchhiker's Guide, which, you know, could be ridiculous at times and could be interesting at other times. And so that's back in 1993, I realized that there was a lucrative market in writing for something other than the cinema screen. It didn't stop my ambitions to write for the cinema screen, but it's only taken until 2014 for technology to catch up to a point where actually you might be able to go straight to an online world. Anyway, that's enough about my rubbish. I wanted to give you two good examples, I'm not swearing at you, two good examples of projects that I've worked on in the last 3 years. And they all, much like Liz's diagram, still take a long time to come out. And the first of them is this project called MILLI, which is another kids program, 3 to 6 years old is our target audience. And MILLI came out of the Academy for Kindermedien is a writers' academy, and there was this young lady came on with a project called MILLI about a snail. And she had a story idea, but she's an illustrator, and she had a lot of amazing illustrations, and she's a designer, an interactive designer, and she wanted to make an iPad app for kids with this thing, and from there I got involved as a story shaper, and from there I got involved as the lead writer. Just work your way in gently. Nobody notices. But MILLI now is big. MILLI is it's an interactive storybook series of apps. The first one is coming out in the next month or so. It's for iPads and Android tablets. It's a sort of 30-page interactive storybook. It uses every function of the app. Absolutely beautifully illustrated, amazing sound design. And it has each story, it's a very long sort of running story about a little snail who doesn't know how to be a snail. She's the only snail on Apple Tree Hill. And so she goes around meeting other creatures and trying to be a bit more like them to find out if what they are is what snails should be. And eventually she sort of figures out that maybe just being a snail is good enough, is what she should be good at. But inside each story there are 3 little mini games that you can play, and it's an approximate sort of 20-minute reading experience, and that's what we thought we were happy with until such time as we put it in front of kids. As you see, this can probably run in the background because there's no sound, don't panic. So we tested the app functionality with kids, and immediately they wanted storybooks as well, and they wanted colouring books as well, and they wanted something physical that they could touch as well as the technical iPad. And we thought, no, this is sort of weird, why would they want to do that? And it was mainly because they're only allowed to use screens for a couple of minutes a day, but they're allowed to read books as long as they want. So, we suddenly realised that our ambition wasn't really matching with our audience ambition and our audience needs. So then we thought, well, actually, picture book series, why not? We have all the stories. And we also had in the back of our heads that because we were working on this part animated, part interactive app world, we were doing so many assets anyway that we should think about doing as an animated series. And once we'd come up with the story idea of, like, here's the snail, she meets a character, she helps the character, rinse and repeat, all you have to do is come up with all the characters. So then we spend a weekend coming up with 126 different animals, 126 different stories, tick, there's your series. It's not that simple, obviously, but we've partnered with a company called Hopster, who, if any of you do have kids and are worried about them watching television with ads, Hopster's a really good idea because it's an app-based broadcaster, which is a free and subscription model, and inside that you get all of the quality kids programs that they want to see, but without all the advertising, so that's quite cool. Anyway, Hopster have given us some money for development, and we're currently working with them to change this world to an animated series as well. And in your head, even with 15, coming up to 20 years experience in working in this industry, I still find myself going, why did we just say that yes? Why did we say that was an easy idea? Not that I'm saying you should say no, but writing the interactive stories and writing the picture books are completely different, and writing the animated TV series and writing the picture books are very different, and every step you have to suddenly take another step back and go, this isn't going to work as an animated series the way I thought it was going to. Have to rewrite this structure. So what we've done cleverly, this is the first project I've worked on where I can actually say we thought about this at the outset, is we created a Bible that allowed for, apparently you're not allowed to call it a Bible anymore, but that's what we've called it. It's the big book that gives all the rules, the rule book, the roadmap, the whatever. But it gives every single, from even down to, it's got all the illustration details in it as well. But it gives every detail for anybody picking it up to write either the animated series, a new series of picture books, a new series of storybooks. And we've planned it with expansion in mind. So even inside that Bible is the expansion to a feature-length film. Should it happen that way, what rules could you change? Because there are certain characters that aren't capable of speech. Snails, for example, don't have a mouth, but we've had to figure out a way that they can still speak. But there's all sorts of rules in there that you go, and this was the first time that we've actually put all of those rules down at the outset with, we haven't got the plan for the theme park, but in the back of our heads, we've got the plan for the theme park. It's going to be great. But we've sort of expanded that universe before so a lot of people thought, well, you're getting ahead of yourselves. There's something about the production company I'm working with on this Honig who are very good at that kind of far-thinking, theoretical plan. And we go, once we've got all of this, we'll test everything, see if it works, and it's back to Liz's thing of testing things quickly and failing and falling apart and putting them back in front of the audiences. We went into schools with paper versions, like paper versions of an iPad, and just had people moving them about and seeing what worked and whether a snail was actually the right character, whether kids like snails, whether boys like snails or girls like snails. All of these things was, they're all there, and how the games work. And the thing that keeps sort of coming back to mind is that you have to be aware. The reason we had this Bible is that you're aware of the challenges. Like our biggest challenge, story-wise, is not coming up with the story ideas of the characters, because, as I said, once you've figured out the mechanic, you kind of go, okay, it's going to work. But you have to understand with this, and it's a big thing that comes up on the lab quite often, is who you're aiming your project at, is how are you going to engage them. And with the project for 3 to 6-year-olds, you're aiming it at an exact dual audience. The content has to work for the 3 to 6-year-olds, but the way it's delivered, the way they interact with it, the amount it costs, the frequency of its interactions has to work for the adults, the parents, the carers, the teachers, the whoever else is giving it to them. So it's a weird balance to try and get right with your project. So you're going back all of the time thinking, are these the right stories to tell? Are they going to resonate with that audience? But at the same time, spending hours on Mum's Net forum talking to parents about what they will and won't allow their kids to watch, how much time they'll allow them to play, how much money they'll be willing to spend on in-app purchases. In-app purchases for a 3 to 6-year-old market is a fiercely contentious thing to mention on a web forum. But yeah, so all of that, and then the risks for us, it was as more and more things came on board. So we got some funding from Ein Netz für Kinder to make an educational web portal, but it's for a slightly older audience, and you have to sit very carefully and go, we've agreed to do this, this is going to be great, and it is going to work really beautifully, but does it do anything to dilute the brand? If I'm a 3 to 6-year-old and I see Millie the snail and I love her, and then I go on this website that's far too complex for me, do I feel like Millie's not mine anymore? So what do you do with your brand? And if you've got a project like this in which there are 100 other children's interactive storybooks, how do you guarantee your penetration of the market? Which people do you need to partner with? And the weird thing is that the more you work in this industry, the more you realize that as a writer, as a producer, as a director, these are considerations you do have to have if you want to stay and be lasting. And the only reason I kind of mentioned the Hitchhiker's Guide stuff at the beginning is that we got a note recently saying that the game that was developed in '93, Starship Titanic, which was the very beginning part of that Hitchhiker's online journey, was a CD-ROM game, and it's still running now as an RPG on some random car park server in the middle of nowhere. And it's sort of taken on its own life, and it's the strength of that kind of brand penetrating the market and giving people something that they feel that they can own. So we hope, and you know, next year I can tell you whether it worked or not, we hope that we've got it right with MILLI and that we've taken the right steps to get the process in order. You can follow MILLI on Facebook at the moment, and if you go on now, you can send them an email and get the beta version of the app. I don't know how that works as a business model, but yeah, knock yourselves out. So that was MILLI, but I just wanted to sort of, you know, just sort of give you that before I get into Netwars, which is fiercely complicated. Was just to give you a sort of an overview of something that does start as one concept, but it has, as soon as you see the idea, it has the space to do a lot more things, so that you know you should prepare for that rather than waiting until somebody comes along and says, hey, we'll give you some money to do this, and you go, great, yeah, sure. Shit, I've got to think of how you do it. Try and do it the other way, so that when somebody offers you money, you know whether it's a good idea to take the money or not. Because sometimes it's not a good idea to take money. Just saying. Okay, Netwars. And I mean for projects, not for anything else. It's up to you, do what you like. Netwars is a project that, interestingly, my relationship with came out of being on the Pixel Lab. One of the people who was in my group, we kept in touch after the lab went, and I did some writing for his company, and he got asked to do a prototype for this interactive version of a documentary, like a graphic novel version of a documentary project that was going on. And they wanted an English writer on board, so would I be interested in doing it? And that's how I got involved. And that, I think, was at the end of 2011, freakishly enough. So this has been a long project and very passionately fought. As Liz said, it's a production company here in Berlin called Film Tank. They also have an arm in Hamburg, but it was the Berlin side that we were working with here. Michael Grottenhoff and Saskia Kress were the main producers, and then they teamed up later in the day with Lena Thiele to do the online experience as well. And I know lots of people have seen bits of Netwars presented, and for me the interesting thing was being involved from the very, very beginning as the writer of the fictional side, but having an eye over what was happening on the non-fiction side. I'll walk you through the different things, but this was a project that, again, seemed when it was first pitched to be a linear documentary, interesting 1-hour television. It was going to be on Arte. That was all ready to go. But the production company knew that there was more in it, and they wanted to explore what they could do, and so it was helpful to get me involved as well for that.
Do you remember the attack on Estonia in 2007? All that commotion, all those people without money or gasoline. Well, that was in the past. We were just fooling around then. Welcome to our little shop of opportunities.
We are in the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
Highly sophisticated hacking attacks could cause blackouts, lasting for weeks.
Ich besorge mir die entsprechenden Teile.
I'd get all the parts from eBay or other retailers. Then I'd teach myself how to hack a generator.
Look at Stuxnet, look at Estonia, look at so many of these cases are this back and forth.
They want to attack us.
The world's biggest problem is Israel's biggest opportunity.
Why build new weapons when you can turn anything into a weapon? Spreading ideology has never been easier. So let's talk about information, art of warfare on an educated level. I offer you the tools to hit your enemy where it really hurts.
Immerse yourself in the new dimension of storytelling. The interactive graphic novel you've never seen before. Netwars.
Whatever it is you want to teach the world, I don't judge. I'm just a salesman. Maybe you just want to... Why oppress people when you can infiltrate them? Why torture them when you can fuck them?
So you can see this project is, if we got a project like this over the application process at Power to the Pixel, we would all have sat in the assessment meeting and laughed, because it's apart from the theme park, which isn't on there, it is a tick list of pretty much every platform and pretty much every concept you can get for cross-platform. But it didn't start that way. It started as a documentary, and as I say, the production company really wanted to do a graphic novel out. They knew these two components they wanted to do because they felt that the subject matter lent itself to more than a linear TV documentary. They felt that it would miss a key section of the audience that probably weren't watching 1 hour feature documentaries on Arte. They knew that there was a younger, more interactive demographic that they wanted to get the same message to, but it was never going to be able to be told in the same way. And we discussed really early on this concept of the Sunday afternoon, the Sunday lunch, where the grandparents and the parents and the aunts and uncles and the nephews and nieces and the kids are all around the table together, and they're all talking about current affairs, because that's what happens in families. And they're all talking to each other, and they've all sort of seen something in the press, on television, about cyber war, cyber terrorism, the current sort of threats online. And they all then realise that they've seen a very separate part of the same project, and that's when you feel like you've successfully delivered your message to as many different parts of the audience as possible. Even in the very early stages, we were still talking about just doing the tele-documentary and the graphic novel, and those were going to be the parts of the cross-platform project. The problem with this project is as soon as you tell somebody what you're doing, they go, "That's great. Could you do one of these as well?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure, not a problem. How's that going to be difficult?" So we kept getting new partners on board, coming and offering money or partnerships, relationships, and the project kept expanding. And as Liz talked about earlier, we were talking about the sort of minimal viable product. And what we realized is that there were two factors involved. One, that you had to get something out there to lay claim to the fact that we were going to be doing a project that was going to take a long time, so we didn't want somebody else to get there first. And the other thing was that there was so much information sort of floating about on the internet that if you could find a way to aggregate it and package it you already start building a brand and creating credibility to the content that you're putting out there in a very simple way without costing yourselves a lot of money. So that first step that launched was this info portal, which basically gave you information about the project, gave you that teaser that well, not quite the teaser you've seen because half those things didn't exist yet, but a teaser, and then aggregated all of the articles, reports, bits of information, things from YouTube, all on the same page, and started to categorize it into different subjects. So already we could start talking about Netwars, the project whilst we were developing the documentary and whilst we were developing the graphic novel. The difficulty immediately came about in that you've got this TV documentary, you've got the web portal. These are both in no way fictional, even though the subject matter feels like science fiction. It's pure non-fiction. And then all of a sudden you are coming up with an interactive web documentary series, which we realized quickly we needed to do. So we started working on a second running documentary that allowed people to engage more with the actual hacking, with being able to sort of figure out how you could hack certain things, or showing the audience how vulnerable they are, their own data and their own interactions are. And in order to do that, we realized we started to have to build some fictional sides into it to bring that audience in the way we wanted to. Hence, your man who does all the talking there is a guy called Nikolai Kinski, an actor. And he became, between Lena, Michael and myself, we created this character who has now become, as Liz said, the kind of, partly the fictional jelly in this project. Is the kind of thing that he appears in most of the elements. And he is a salesman he works in the dark web. I don't know if you know about the dark web, but it's a place where you can buy drugs and prostitutes and guns and order murder, and it's all anonymous, so I mean, look it up afterwards. But he is a broker, and a lot of people became brokers after the last economic crisis in 2008. I can bore you at length about this. But he's sort of this character that draws the audience in and gets them interacting with the documentary content. So then I'm writing the graphic novel, and you think, well, this is really exciting. I've got, and it's really James Bond, you know, and all of this stuff happens. But because it's linked to a documentary project, the experts who are our consultants keep saying, well, no, that wouldn't happen, so you can't do that. And I keep saying, but it's fiction, so it has to be allowed to happen. And they're like, yeah, but it's part of a documentary project, so it can't happen. So suddenly you're blending fiction in a graphic novel, fiction in a web documentary, with non-fiction in a web documentary, and total non-fiction in a documentary, and it's all becoming a little bit confusing. So we had to sort of take a step back and strip it back down to what stories do we want to tell, who are we telling them to, in which part. And this is a project that, were we to do it again, we'd do all of that thinking at the beginning of the project, like we've done with MILLI, rather than doing it at the end, as each new platform arrives on the scene. So it's just something to think about if you've got a huge theme that you want to talk about. And then we, speaking of fiction, so I'm writing the graphic novels, and then the Film Tank say to me, well, we've got a publishing company, the publisher Bastei Lübbe, on board. Their Bastei Entertainment section wants to license the graphic novel to publish it. And at the same time, they've asked, would you be able to write a novel? To which my response was, yeah, sure, how difficult can that be? That's going to be hard. So I agreed to write the first one, which is The Code, and that was, I had 3 months to write it. It was being released at exactly the same time as the graphic novel app that they were still finishing testing of. So I had 3 months to write it. It was being released simultaneously in English, German, Chinese. So as I delivered each first draft section, it was going straight to the editor and to the translator, which was interesting. So there's not a lot of room for making any, can't go back and go, hey, you know that bit I wrote in the beginning that I don't like anymore? Like, oops. So it was a very tight turnaround on this, but you know, it's great. And it got to #1 in German Kindle chart, big in Germany. And it's an audio book, and then it became a paperback book. And then they said, could you do a second novel? And I said, yeah, sure. I know how hard it can be, but it's going to be fine. I had 4 months this time. So I wrote, so they're both, 120,000 words, big things. But what these had to do was they couldn't have the same characters or story as the graphic novel, because you'd ruin the story by not reading one and, so everything, if you can't kill somebody in one and have him alive in another. So I suddenly had to come up with new characters, new stories, and then the same for the next bit, the fiction series. We've got interest in a film. We've also got interest in a TV series. Could you write, and they can't be the same either. So suddenly you've got this one character who's this salesman who pops up in the background of everything, but he can't be too major because otherwise he gets too confusing. So you can see it's just this enormous thing. But what was good about it was that we had started at the beginning creating a very strong brand and had always talked about Story World, so we could create these channels. Even if we were doing it retrospectively, you could create these channels of facts and fiction and how they would cross over. And the guys we were working with, interactivity specialists for the graphic novel, came up with this mantra that they kept hitting us with, which was alles kann, nichts muss, which is that the audience should be able to do anything and everything, but they shouldn't have to do any one thing in order for the other things to make sense. And it was the easiest way for us to carve out putting this guy front and center and linking all of these things so that when you experience any one of them, you feel like you're inside the world. There are familiar nods. If you've read the graphic novels, there are nods in the novels to characters that you've seen, or groups or organizations. But you don't have to have read one. You don't even have to have read the first novel to read the second novel. They're self-contained stories. And it's something that you should really think about, is that how many platforms your audience has to, how many jumps they have to make in order to really understand what you've tried to do. Because I've worked on projects where, you know, the moment where the audience says this project is great, it's even more confusing than Lost, is the moment that you know they haven't seen half the stuff you've built and that you've ruined it for everyone. So we've not done that with Netwars. We've stuck very religiously to everything being independent and isolated, but hopefully tied it under this brand, starting with the stuff that's easiest to release first, that we can control, web formats, into the TV documentary, and then into the audio, ebook, and graphic novel app, and then eventually 2016 into the TV series, all tied together with this one character. And he became our kind of linchpin of how the hell do we make this into one brand retrospectively. And so I will leave you with him, and then Liz and I are going to have a little chat. You're welcome to be part of that chat. It's not about contracts or business, or it's some stuff.
Dear leaders of the world, royal families, cult leaders, beloved terrorists, all of you are in critical positions, and it's only natural that you ask yourself, what went wrong? What went wrong? Are you tired of the old school way? Tired of shooting people, bombing hospitals, enriching uranium? Don't despair. Everything is not lost. We can still turn things around. How, you ask? Example, New York City, 9 a.m. rush hour, 2 million people riding elevators. And every last single one of those elevators controlled by IT chips manufactured far from home. Nowadays they come with built-in extra features like nanoscale backdoors. By the way, similar chips are processed in drones, vaults, prison security systems, water supply systems, etc., etc., etc. It all comes down to the question, why build new weapons when you can turn anything into a weapon? Click one. Elevators all over the city get stuck. Maybe that's all you want. Maybe you just want to scare them to death, give them a little perspective. Or maybe you're a real bad motherfucker. Are you? Well, then proceed to click 2. Whatever it is you want to teach the world, I don't judge. I'm just a salesman. So now, do you want to play?
So that was one of the links from inside the documentary project. I recommend you go and play with the documentary project online, netwars-project.com, because it's a really fascinating, terrifying interactive experience where you kind of think, oh, I'm being clever, I've got all these safety things on my computer is so safe right now, if I leave it behind, it'll burn itself. It's like, but even I believed that the documentary was downloading stuff onto my computer. So I'm like, I wrote this. Anyway, so I recommend, you have to suspend disbelief sometimes. So I recommend you have a look at it if you haven't already seen it, and there's a hell of a lot more to that project. And as I say, I'm just about to start writing the 3rd novel. The TV series is there's a film. It's never going to end. But there's always room for more. Shall we sit? Shall I take this?
Thank you, Sean. Gosh, you're going to be a busy man.
What, with more Netwars?
Yeah. And
no. I am available for other writing that isn't cyber terrorism related.
Yeah. And
I have other skills bases.
MILLI, I love the
snails.
Contrast. Yes, snails.
I'm good at snails. Yeah.
we've got 20 minutes, so please feel free to put your hand up and ask us anything. We'd be delighted to answer it. This is meant to be a totally interactive session, so we'd love to hear from you if you have story or project experiences you would like to share with us about what you've done and what experience you've had about building ideas in new ways. So please just raise your hand if you have a question. But Sean, I'm really interested because you've worked with now quite a few different companies, and this idea of creating an identity or a brand for an idea, is it something you've seen change? For example, Film Tank, and this was a completely new way of working for them.
Yeah.
And it sort of like came about very organically with this project. Do they speak in a different way about project development now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was talking to them here on Saturday evening, and we were just talking, we were sort of looking back at this project and looking at the next steps, which is, you know, for the last 3 years we've been having meetings about next steps, and there are always new next steps. And we were just saying, you know, it's like, even when you think you know so much about how to do this kind of stuff, because the technology changes, because the marketplace changes, so all of a sudden you have got publishers coming in with pots of money asking to be part of this world, we're still sort of back-footing a little bit, whereas they, as a production company, having gone through this experience literally the hard way, they now know at least the framework to add stuff, to put something forward next time. So the next project that they're pitching to us to come on the lab, they already know how many boxes they're going to need to tick and how long each thing's going to take. Their expectations are properly managed. They've made different decisions about who they would partner with at which point, how early, when it's right to get into bed with certain licensed partners, when it's better for the project to just turn the money down and carry on with the line you had. They have more confidence to do that now. But a lot of other companies that I see and work with, and independent producers as well, have more confidence to have those conversations, having had one stab at the hard way.
And so what kind of processes are you seeing? Because obviously it's a completely different way of sort of how you sort of create your, you know, the idea of creating Bibles for a project like this is pretty new.
Yeah.
I mean, often, you know, in television series or animation, it was something you had to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of a project like this, we never saw things like this. Like like a business plan, a Bible. Is that the kind of thing you've seen change when it comes to sort of strategic work?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of that is also just that the people getting involved in these projects are different. So they are, when I started in the 90s, the people doing this were people like me who had a Commodore 64 when they were 12, and they'd just dabbled in programming and got bored, and, you know, but had watched a lot of films. So there were, basically what I'm saying is there were a lot of web producers with a creative idea who were trying to make content, and it sort of failed for that reason. And I think recently, as the platforms merge a little more, you get more traditional media producers and creators coming across to the platform. So you get traditional filmmakers, you get traditional television series people, you get traditional authors who are sort of suddenly realizing that they're opening new doors, but they bring with them that story world creation experience, and they're then layering that onto how do we, if we're going to create a game, it still needs to apply to the story world. So I think having that expertise from the traditional media coming across into an interactive media space has also really helped kind of professionalize the industry, if for want of a better word. It's just to put story and audience back at the center of what we do. And I worked on so many projects where we made a project, and when you actually look back at it, you go, we only did that because the technology was cool, and the only people who knew that the technology was cool was us, and the audience just thought it was a really shit series because it was all about how we did it, not what it was, you know, what it was telling them. So I think that's being kicked out a bit, and there's much, you know, we see at the market, we see people that you would ordinarily see on the bill at a very traditional film market. Suddenly they're presenting their new cross-platform project, and you're like, hello, Ken Loach, how are you?
Yeah,
nice to see you.
Yeah, last year.
What are you doing in my transmedia world? But it's great, you know, and I think that is, we've only in the last couple of years, we've hit a point where genuinely the screen quality, the speed, the download speeds in the Western world, obviously, you know, we're really lucky with that kind of stuff. So you don't have to be reliant upon traditional distribution, traditional investment models. You know, you can suddenly go, well, we'll just do it.
Yeah.
MILLI was, half of MILLI was funded off a Kickstarter campaign. Sorry, Indiegogo. Didn't want to mention them publicly.
It's like if Miranda's going to get her own back in a minute.
We would have done so much better if we'd done Indiegogo.
It's all going to be Indiegogo. Timo's Indiegogo. That's
yeah,
a
there
good
you go.
story.
Big
More
work,
money
good
as
work.
well. So we've got one question over there.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Hello. Hello. No. Yeah. Thanks. I think there are a lot of filmmakers in the room who think it's a really interesting approach to getting some publicity to the project and maybe even expanding. Can you talk a little to what your advice would be for someone who's really new to this subject and is looking for some ideas to make their project and their film grow into some cross-media thing?
Yeah, sure. I think there's two parts to that answer really. The first is that none of these things come cheap. So if you have to think really carefully about why you would use one platform over another, why you would do an app rather than posters on the metro to advertise your film, and how that's going to, and Timo will talk about this a lot more, but how you will engage an audience that stay with you for a lifetime and become huge advocates of your brand and will pay, to be part of your marketing campaign effectively. And I think that's where you have to be really clever with how creative you are. Like, if you're using these other platforms to market your film, it mustn't feel like a moving poster, because you may as well have put a poster up. And then everybody walks past and goes, oh, that's a good poster, that looks really good.
But that's pretty expensive as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm not saying it's not,
Yes.
but the problem, so the other part of that problem is if you do an app, a poster works because people look at the wall as they're walking to the metro and they go, oh, there's a film, I understand this, but it's an app. You know how many apps are out there? So how are you going to advertise the app that's advertising the film? So you have to be very clever about the way you use those. And so in answer to if you genuinely know nothing, A, come to the Pixel Lab or come to the market and hear more about it, but B, find partners in, and there are a lot of them about. There are a lot of people who are, I would say, find somebody that does know and does understand, find examples of versions that have worked before that you like, and talk to those people, because invariably they're quite open. We're all quite open about being talked to by people who don't know.
And also another thing is to, exactly what Sean said, is remember that you're developing another product. It's not, to think of it, and this is a problem about the way, when I talked about coming from the film world, is every part of developing a film project, traditionally, is completely fragmented, and the marketing always sits afterwards. This is part of the storytelling world, so that you are developing a product in its own right, and it has to be marketed, or you have to find engagement for it in its own right, which is why Sean pointed that. So if you call yourself a filmmaker and that's what you want to do, thinking very carefully, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? This idea of thinking, what are you good at? What can you do? And why do you want to do it? Because once you get into this world, you have to be very clear of your motivations.
Yeah, and I think, it's going back to the same answer has to apply to why am I telling this film? Why am I telling the story of this film? And is there part of that story that just isn't going to reach the right people because of the constraints of this format, which is what I was saying with our documentary. Like, it's a very certain audience. Even though somebody younger may have watched it and found it fascinating, it wasn't aimed at them. It's not to exclude them, but then you realise that there is still so much more to that story that you could tell in a different way, and then you sort of bring a fresh perspective to it. And there's no harm in, this company, Film Tank, had never done interactive before. They were very interested in the idea of it, but they partnered with somebody who'd done incredible work in the interactive field and talked lots about it and met at conference, and they just went up to her and went, we really want somebody to help with this. And she went, sure, it sounds great. Of course, you're going to have to pay me, but yeah, so it's find your partners, and there are many at every level, so you can go through.
Okay, we've got some more questions. So one over there. Thanks.
Hello. I have a question for the financing. Is it also the cross-medial or just a TV channel finances only a film or a serie, and Bastarlube only the books? Or it's also like you know what I mean?
So how was each part of the project financed? Is that your project? Who financed which part?
It's very rare that you'll come up with a project that you'll have one funder for, unless you happen to know some oligarchs that are friendly to your subject matter. Which we know somebody who does. Anyway, never mind. We're not talking about that now. But what you end up doing is you have to be very clever about how you partition the rights and how you organise those contracts. And what can happen quite quickly is that you find yourself partnering with somebody because they came to the table first with the money. You have to actually think of your overview. And if I give away the book rights, say for example, if I give away the film rights to the book, does that preclude me from making a separate film? Because there's already a Netwars film about this book. So what do I? So you have to actually. It's not. I would say it's not the kind of thing you should try and tackle on your own. Try and find people who are expert. We bring them to the lab as well, and it's always those sessions where you think, how are we going to make this session interesting? But the session on rights management, contracts, laws and finance, and who's going to pay for which bit and what that offers them, what window, in which territory, all of those things. You go from, you know how complicated that is with your film? It's the same for all the other bits. It's the same complicated. So you have to kind of be aware that that's going to happen. And
there aren't financiers who, I mean, the thing is, it's like, is there a financier that finances an idea? You know, you're growing a brand, but if it has many different products, you're often going to have to go to all those different industries to finance each part. But what's interesting when you come and look at Timo's project is you look at how, when you go to the consumer or your audience, how that's in fact, you know, that's who you're looking to in the end, how you bring them into building an idea. And they're probably the only person who would finance an idea as opposed to just a product. I don't know what you think about that, because Timo's done a mixture. It's quite interesting in terms of crowdfunding and crowd investment that he's going to mention when he talks about his project. So, but still, you're going to have to go to all those different media industries to finance a product, and you have to pitch your project in a different way to every single one of them. That part sits in the blue, you know, that blue circle at the moment, because that's what they're interested in still. They're still siloed.
But I think, I mean, don't be downhearted, because the one good thing, and you'll see it in all of these examples, is that there are things that you can do very effectively for very little money, and you can kickstart the process. And as soon as you can prove that there are 70,000 people who like your Facebook page, then, you know, somebody's more keen to put some money towards something than they would be if you went to them in a back room at a market and went, I've got this great idea, and it's got this, and it's got that, and it's got a theme park, and they're like, oh,
that's
really?
what a true sort of like equity investor is interested in, the fact that you have a consumer base.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, the web is a good way of you know, and these digital platforms are a good way of rapidly pushing stuff out that people can see without don't ruin your brand by pushing out crap, but, you know, find a balance.
Okay, we've got another question over there. So we're going to try and take a couple more questions after this, quickly. We'll try and be quick.
And then we'll break out.
Yeah, because remember that you can talk to all of us during the break. We've got 90 minutes.
Yeah.
You can have a break.
Question.
Okay, hi. My name is Tommy. I'm working on a web series project, and I know the financial part is a big problem, but as you mentioned, everything costs. But for film and using it for web, I think there are a lot of cheap options. That's why I got the idea. You can place your movie on the internet, YouTube, Facebook, doing things like this. You can place background stories. You can work with. You can use, for example, set photographies as media. You can use a lot of these things, which aren't, if you do it clever, it doesn't cost a lot. But I always ask myself, how can I place it the right way? I mean, I have ideas for a teaser, trailer, for all, a campaign which is similar to this what I saw right now. And I can put it on YouTube, on some other things. But
Well, and your question is, how do you strategically do that?
How to reach the people? I mean, these are platforms.
You're talking about, at what point? Are you talking about a completed project? Or you're talking about something you're kick-starting or you're halfway through? Because those are two very different things.
No. I'm asking for about how to
distribute.
To distribute
a finished product.
Yes.
A finished product.
Yes.
Well, that's a very that's a big question, because it's either are you going to, you've got to, this is still an issue with the traditional way that the film business works. Is the windowing issue is still an issue if you want to generally go with a traditional sales agent or a distributor or theatre release. You have to abide by the unfortunate release window structure depending on what country you're in. I mean, Timo, it's interesting with your film because you have this amazingly different way of engaging the audience, but when it came to distribution, you still had this issue with distribution, which I think is interesting what you're going to do next time. I'm fascinated to see how you're going to, if there's a way of getting through that. But it is tricky. It's often you're in a black and white situation where it's hard. You have to have, either there are ways that you can take on the distribution yourself and service it and pay people, but obviously you need to find a way of financing that, or you're bound within that release window situation. But if you do choose to go that way, it's kind of interesting of this idea that you can sign non-exclusive deals with a lot of these online platforms, which gives you an opportunity to go into many, many places, which is kind of weird, because you're either in a totally non-exclusive deal world with a lot of the online platforms, or you're completely tied up with a restricted model. And it's combining the two, I think, is quite difficult. And we can talk a bit, I think in your session, we can talk a bit more about that with the issues with Iron Sky.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things for me is, and this is over years of trying to do exactly what you're saying, is so you kind of create a web series, and when do you start releasing stuff? What stuff do you release on which platform? How do you build that momentum? And Iron Sky is a great example of that momentum building. But with the Flip, we worked on a project in 2008 with MSN, and MSN at the time were getting 90 million hits across their homepage in every 3-month period, and we got homepage advertising and everything because it was funded by them, this drama, and still it was difficult to break through. And what we ended up doing was we found for every subject matter that I'm assuming it's a fictional series.
Yes.
For every subject matter that you find, you'll find the joy of the internet is you'll find a group of obsessed fanatics about that subject matter, and you have to. There's two things you have to do with those people. Is one, you have to be one of them, not in a fake way. You have to give them the reason you're telling this story. The reason you wanted to make exactly this series is because you too are passionate about. For us, it was a dystopian future, sci-fi, apocalyptic doodah. Love it. I love that kind of stuff. It has to be green. I love it. And so we approached all of these. We found bloggers who had 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 followers, and they blogged about everything sci-fi. And we made a little appeal video like you would for a campaign, and we sent it to all of them just going, it's us three. Basically, there are two big companies that are funding this, but they're giving us a very small amount of money, and they kind of don't know what they're getting into, and we're going to try and make it work as best as possible. They helped us with advice, what the fan base would like. They promoted everything. We gave them everything from the crappiest poster to the logo to some stickers. They were like, yeah. And there was only one guy who came back and went, nah, not for me, I'm sick of shit sci-fi. And the rest of them were just like, great, you're one of us. And we really, be honest with that audience, because you have to be one of them if you're going to do it non-cynically. And then you'll get people really on your side, and that's what the web's good for. And that will build to you being able to do a much bigger release of a much bigger thing, or get partners from YouTube to Vimeo to whatever who are interested in maybe putting some commissioning money, making a second season. So you kind of have to you think in your head of working from how's it going to get from me, my mum and my brother to their friends, to their friends, to their friends, and move it that way. And that is what the web is good for. But you will always find die-hard super fans of your subject matter that you can appeal to but don't go in and go, we're making this series, we're going to make loads of money, can you help us? You're like, no, I can't help you. So that's my advice, is to use those platforms for what their audience is using them for.
One more question at the back, over there.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, I'm from London Film School. Here is, as you said before, you distribute to your own project. But the question what I want to ask is whether we can exchange the place. Like I use a short film to promote my app, and which part of it can earn more money, whether it's available in this generation? Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So, if I understand it right, you have all of these parts. For example, you have these parts of your project, and which one do you put where to make the most money out of it?
I mean, if I can write a book, I can have my own app, but I use a short film to promote my own this part of things, whether it's available. I mean, whether the film can earn more money or the project can just get more income.
That's like how long is a piece of
string?
Yeah,
that's a real piece of string. It's like it depends where you put it, depends how you market it, depends who sees it, depends how well you've written the book, how well you've made the film. Generally. So I mean, it's one of those things. I don't know that there's. Every now and then you'll get something that just pops up and makes an enormous amount of money freakishly, and then everybody jumps on it going, short films, that's the way to do it, or books.
Or if you're Disney, you're going to sell merchandise, so that's your goal. I think seriously, I mean, like we were talking about this with MILLI, and that cynically, for children's very rarely will you get a TV series fully funded by the commissioner or the broadcaster. It's very rare you're going to make money out of that. It's very rare you're going to make money out of the apps because 69p really, who cares? And once everybody's taken their stipend. But actually where you will make money with something like that is merchandising, and then you start getting cynical because something like Peppa Pig made 200 million in merchandising alone last year or the year before. And you kind of go, oh sure, we'll take a little bit of that then. But then you don't set out to make a project because the backpack is going to make you more money. And I think you need to look at why. Like, if the heart of what you're doing is to make money, then my best advice would be to wait until the market is ready for that kind of capitalism. Oh,
I think it's a bit more altruistic.
It's kind of quite ready. It just depends what you have to do. And it depends what your goal is. I mean, some of the projects that we're going to show, their goal is not about making money. Like High Rise is not a project whose success is based on that. But it is, I mean, it's like if your brand...
Does it change the order? I mean,
it's about, growing a brand. I mean, if you look at how brands are grown, it's complex and they all have different starting points.
I think the thing is always to be careful of just following the money and letting that dictate your release schedule. Like you should try and get your release schedule to be the best thing for the story and the story world and what that does and how that brings the audience in, and let that dictate. And hopefully, if it's going well, then it should make you some money. But if you try and chase the dollar, inevitably you'll end up losing people, or they'll feel like it's a cynical approach. I think, but that's probably why I'm not very rich. I don't. That could be that.
I will say no more. But I think we're going to have to. On that note, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get out of this conversation.
Go. Well, we're here. Let's network.
But I'm going to hand over to Christine, who's going to introduce us to the next part of the session. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and hopefully you're going to stay behind.
Thank you so much, Jean and Liz. This session, both cross-media sessions, are developed and supported with the friendly support of our main partner, Medienboard Berlin-Brandenburg. And also Esther Rotstege is here in the audience. Maybe you can stand up. She's a funding advisor at Medienboard Berlin-Brandenburg, and Medienboard supported a lot of cross-media projects in the past, and she's with us also today for the networking part. thanks for coming, and also thanks to a creative skill set. I would like to introduce you to Miranda Fleming. She is a producer and also within Indiegogo. Please introduce yourself a little bit more, and also please say a little bit more about this largest crowdfunding platform you created in the past years.
Thank you very much. We have got a film because it was a really exciting year for Indiegogo. There's some big changes coming for filmmakers. We have, the founders of Indiegogo have worked, have known Berlinale and Berlinale talents, as I have done as a producer. But I think this year was the first year there's a real movement. We've talked about it for years. In fact, Liz was one of the people who inspired me about 10 years ago. But what I think is so interesting about filmmakers who are making shorts and you're perhaps just developing your first feature is we all really work to get to what is now out there, and it's really, really you're really missing something if you're not up on all the tools that are available for you now. So truly become independent filmmakers, to truly avoid the hideous traps for indie filmmakers that we have all been through. There had to be a solution for indie filmmakers. That comes with financing, marketing your own films, looking at hybrid distribution models. And so I very much feel that crowdfunding sits in that distribution and filmmaking ecosystem. Can we play the film very quickly? I don't know if... Yep. Do I have to press something? Okay. So here's our year in review. It's a little bit US focused because we had a big presence at Sundance this year. So I apologise for the lack of the European films, but I'll talk about them after the clip. But I can't take the credit. How many, just out of interest, how many producers are here? Oh, good. And directors and writers? I mean, in particular, of course, all the talents are really important, but crowdfunding gives you the ability, A, to fund. The vision of our founders was to democratize financing, get rid of the gatekeepers. And in Europe in particular, we rely very heavily on subsidised funding, and a lot of times those gatekeepers say no. And I, as a producer, 10 years ago, had to throw brilliant projects away because I had no alternative means. I didn't have rich investors, etc., etc. You can now launch a crowdfunding campaign and you can get that funding. So for shorts, I think as a film, that's incredibly important money. And we've seen those kind of amounts of money really raised. So I am one of the Berlinale campus, as it was then called, one of the alumni from about 4 years ago. She crowdfunded on Indiegogo. I exec the film, I think that was in 2010, and she got £3,000, which she needed to finish the post-production. She'd probably now get £7,000 or £10,000. The market's really growing, so as the years go on, we're seeing the funds raise. And I'm not going to go on very much longer because we just come and say hi, come and take a business card. I'm based in the UK, but I look after Europe. And we can email directly if anybody here is thinking of crowdfunding a project. Indiegogo did actually fund more films in January than Kickstarter, and we've got a 33% growth in 2014. And some of the figures are very, very high, and we've got a Fox Searchlight picture launching a campaign in February. So all the different sizes are going on. Europe is a little bit slower. But my theory on why it's a little bit slower is because it's been very slow to change and pick up on the distribution models. And distribution and crowdfunding sit very, very closely together in film. 3 years ago, again, as filmmakers, I urge you to read the really good material that has been around for a few years, mostly written by US filmmakers. There's an organisation called the Film Collaborative. Their books are free online. And there's a book called How to Sell Your Film Without Selling Your Soul. And it was one of the first books that really inspired me as a producer, that suddenly told me that I didn't have to get a distributor in my country. I could really do something different. What would it look like if I used my festival as my premiere? What would it look like if I paid an aggregator to put my film up on all the VOD platforms and I didn't have to have somebody in the middle taking my profit? It's an incredibly exciting time for filmmakers. So anyway, I'm here. I also want to introduce Essie Suomela, who was the campaign organizer and has a company with Timo called Spaceboy, and she's helping with some consultancy with Indiegogo. And so if anybody here has maybe crowdfunded a short or a project and it didn't go very well, come have a chat with Essie and just mull it over, because there are sort of things that really work in crowdfunding, things that really don't work in crowdfunding. And so I really urge that you make contact with me or talk to Essie and I today before you think about crowdfunding. I think that's Conrad. Is that Conrad? Hello, Conrad. He's our Berlin-based consultant at Indiegogo. Nice to meet you. We've never met. Hi. I recognise your picture. So thank you all very much for today, and we're delighted to be in Berlinale Talents, and thank you, Christine, for all your hospitality. And we are also, for the filmmakers, we have partnerships with festivals and with labs, and we're absolutely delighted to be working with Berlinale Talents. And this year, out of the projects in the 2015 Berlinale Talents, we're looking for 4 to 6 projects, shorts or features in the lab that might need to fund this year. And Indiegogo are going to give them special mentoring, advice and guidance. We have the same partnership with Sheffield Doc Fest and with the Canadian Film Centre in Toronto. So I'm very looking forward to our partnership over the year with those projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Also, thank you. You spent 5 hours yesterday together with the talents from the project.
I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, and we will also soon launch a partner page on Indiegogo where you find also projects from the talents from this year.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, network breakout means that we have drinks here inside. You will find here water, smoothies, lemonade, and also outside. Miranda will stay here. And also Liz, Jean, and also the expert from the next session, Raphael and Timo, are available for your questions. And also, I introduced you already to Esther from the Medienboard. She is also here with us. And I would also ask, where is Tanja Schmoller from Gebrüder Beetz? Maybe you can also stand up. Gebrüder Beetz is here a production company based in Berlin, and also mainly doing cross-media and documentaries. Thanks so much for being here, and let's break out.